The garage lights flickered as Daniel Reyes knelt beside a dead engine that wasn't his, in a workshop that wasn't his, praying to a God he wasn't sure was listening anymore. Behind him stood the woman who owned half the city's skyline, arms crossed, diamond watch catching the fluorescent glare, and a smile on her face that looked less like hope and more like a dare. She had just told him that if he could get the impossible car running in 1 hour, she would give his daughter's surgery the funding it needed. If he failed, he would lose the only job that stood between his little girl and a hospital bill that could bury them both. Nobody in that garage believed the old engine would ever turn over again. Nobody, except a father who had already lost too much to be afraid of losing more. If you believe in second chances, in fathers who never give up, and in kindness showing up exactly when the world feels darkest, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 3 years earlier, Daniel Reyes had been an engineer with steady hands and a steadier heart, married to a woman named Claire who filled their small house with laughter and the smell of cinnamon on Sunday mornings. Their daughter, Mia, was 4 years old then, a bright-eyed girl who believed her father could fix anything, because in her small world, he always had. Then came the accident on a rain-slicked highway, a truck that lost control, and a phone call that split Daniel's life into a clean, brutal line of before and after. Claire didn't survive. Daniel did, though some nights he wasn't sure he wanted to. What kept him upright was Mia, 6 years old now, asleep in the next room, unaware that her chest carried a heart condition the doctors said would need surgery before she turned 7, a surgery that cost more than Daniel could earn in 2 years of overtime. He had taken every job he could find. Auto mechanic by day, night shift dispatcher 3 nights a week, and on weekends he fixed neighbors' cars for cash in the driveway of the tiny rented house he and Mia shared. He was proud, in the quiet way that men who have lost everything learn to be proud, refusing charity, refusing pity, refusing to let his daughter see him break. But pride doesn't pay hospital bills. So when a friend told him about an opening at Callaway Motors, the luxury car empire owned by the notoriously ruthless Vivian Callaway, Daniel swallowed what was left of his dignity and applied for a job as a junior technician in her private restoration garage, a place where billionaires brought their vintage cars to be resurrected by hands more skilled than money could usually buy. Vivian Callaway had inherited an empire and built it into an obsession. She was 34, brilliant, and colder than the marble floors of her penthouse, a woman who had learned early that trust was a currency other people spent against you. She had buried her own father 2 years earlier, the man who had built Callaway Motors from a single garage into a global name, and along with his company she had inherited his one unfinished project, a 1967 racing engine he had spent the last decade of his life trying to restore, a machine everyone in the industry called unfixable. It sat in the private garage like a shrine and a wound at once, because Vivian's father had died still believing that engine could run again, and she had never let anyone touch it, because letting someone fix it felt too much like letting her father go. Daniel didn't know any of this history when he first walked into that garage, mop in one hand and resume in the other, hoping only for a paycheck. He noticed the old engine tucked in the corner under a canvas cover, dust thick enough to write your name in, and something about its abandonment tugged at him the way broken things always had. He asked one of the senior mechanics about it during his lunch break and was told, flatly, to never touch it, that better men than him had tried and failed, that it was cursed. Daniel nodded and went back to his work, but that night, and many nights after, he found himself lingering near the cover, studying the engine's lines the way he used to study Claire's smile, like it was a puzzle worth solving simply because it existed. Weeks passed. Daniel proved himself quietly reliable, the kind of employee who showed up early, stayed late, and never made excuses, even when Mia's hospital appointments meant he had to leave mid-shift with his jaw tight and his eyes red. Word of the diligent single father with the sick daughter eventually reached Vivian, not through sympathy, but through her assistant's offhand comment during a budget meeting about employee absences. Vivian, who had grown immune to sob stories from people angling for raises, decided to see this one for herself. She walked into the garage unannounced one evening and found Daniel not at his assigned station, but kneeling beside her father's engine, hands gentle on parts nobody had dared touch in 2 years, murmuring to himself the way engineers do when they're solving something with their whole heart and not just their hands. Her first instinct was fury. Her second, buried deeper, was something dangerously close to curiosity. She demanded to know why he was touching a machine explicitly forbidden to the staff, and Daniel, too exhausted from months of grief and worry to summon proper fear of his employer, told her the truth, that the engine reminded him of his daughter, something everyone had given up on, something the world had already decided was broken beyond repair, and that he refused to believe that about either of them. Vivian stood in stunned silence, because no employee had ever spoken to her like that, and because something about his voice cracked a door in her chest that had been welded shut since her father's funeral. It was in that moment, half testing him and half testing herself, that Vivian made the reckless proposal that would upend both their lives. She told him that if he could get that engine running in 1 hour, right then, she would personally cover his daughter's surgery in full. If he failed, he would be fired on the spot for insubordination, and lose the only stable income keeping his daughter's care afloat. It was a cruel gamble dressed up as opportunity, the kind only someone who had never truly feared losing everything could propose so casually, and she said it with a smirk, because smirking was easier than admitting she was desperate for someone, anyone, to prove her father's dream hadn't died with him. Daniel didn't answer with words. He rolled up his sleeves, and the garage around them seemed to hold its breath. For the first 20 minutes, nothing went right. Parts jammed, tools slipped from sweat-damp hands, and the weight of Mia's face flashed behind his eyes every time the engine refused to cooperate, her small voice from that morning asking if Daddy would be home for bedtime. Vivian watched from a distance, arms crossed, telling herself she felt nothing, while her chest tightened with every failed attempt, memories of her father hunched over this same engine flooding back uninvited. Around the 30-minute mark, Daniel found a crack in the fuel line so fine it had escaped every mechanic before him, hidden beneath a layer of corrosion that looked, to untrained eyes, like nothing more than age. It was the kind of detail only someone who examined a thing with love, and not just skill, would ever notice. By the 50-minute mark, sweat soaked through Daniel's shirt, his hands trembled from exhaustion and hope in equal measure, and the small crowd of mechanics who had gathered by the doorway watched with a silence that had shifted from doubt into something like reverence. Vivian's smirk had long since disappeared, replaced by an expression she hadn't worn in years, something unguarded and frightened and hopeful all at once. At 58 minutes, Daniel turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and for one agonizing second, threatened to die exactly as everyone expected it to. Then it roared to life, the sound rattling through the garage like a heartbeat finally restarting after years of silence, and every person in that room felt it in their chest, not just their ears. Vivian pressed a hand to her mouth, tears she hadn't allowed herself in 2 years spilling over before she could stop them, because that sound was her father's voice somehow, telling her he was proud, telling her it was finally okay to let go and move forward at the same time. Daniel didn't celebrate. He simply sat back against the workbench, breathing hard, thinking only of Mia, of the surgery that would now happen, of the promise he could finally keep to a little girl who still believed her father could fix anything. Vivian crossed the garage floor slowly and knelt beside him, no longer the untouchable CEO, just a woman who had watched a stranger do the impossible and, in doing so, hand her back a piece of her father she thought she'd lost forever. She told him, voice unsteady, that the surgery would be covered, every cent, and that starting tomorrow, he would run her father's restoration division, because a man who fixed broken things with that much heart didn't belong mopping floors. What began as a cruel gamble slowly became something neither of them expected. Over the following months, Vivian found reasons to visit the garage more often than any CEO needed to, and Daniel found himself teaching Mia, now recovering beautifully after her successful surgery, how to name every tool on his workbench, while a woman who used to eat lunch alone in a glass office started eating it instead on an overturned crate beside a 6-year-old who called her the engine lady, and had started drawing her into family portraits at school. Trust, once impossible for both of them, rebuilt itself the same patient way that old engine had, one honest piece at a time. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing which part moved you most, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that broken things, and broken people, can still run again. And before we go, I have one small, special request. Comment the word engine below if you believe some things are worth fixing no matter how impossible they seem, because somewhere out there, someone needs to see that comment today. Daniel Reyes never set out to fix a billion-dollar company's broken past, and Vivian Calloway never set out to fall for a single father with grease-stained hands and a daughter's crayon drawings taped to his workbench. But sometimes the most impossible engines, and the most impossible hearts, only need one person patient enough, and brave enough, to believe they can still run. And somewhere in a small house that no longer felt so empty, a little girl fell asleep every night knowing her father truly could fix anything, including, in the end, himself.